Hello and welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. It's happy hour. And I am remaking a cocktail that I enjoyed with one of my friends recently on vacation. She is a reporter here at the Fox News Channel. She has done a phenomenal job on the campaign trail and had a career-defining day as she was covering the Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th, the day the former president was nearly assassinated. Alexis McAdams, welcome back to Kennedy Saves the World.
Thank you. Nowhere I'd rather be.
Okay, cheers to you. This is an Amalfi Spritz.
Awesome. This is really good.
Right?
Costs less, too, than what we paid in Turks and
Way
Caicos.
less. I think the Amalfi Spritzes we enjoyed cost me a kidney.
Probably me,
Yeah.
too. I haven't checked.
It's like, I'm looking at these prices in U.S. dollars, they can't be.
I know.
It's like
oh, my gosh.
5 times overhead.
Yeah.
It's like,
But they were
no.
good. This is
Yeah.
really good. You're good at making cocktails.
Thank you very much.
welcome.
It's light and refreshing. Now, if there were alcohol in it,
Yeah.
it would be limoncello, Saint Germain, peach orange blossom vodka, and sparkling rosé
Great.
with a little bit of fresh grapefruit and fresh lemon juice.
Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's like a vacation in a glass.
So tell me about the day in Butler, Pennsylvania, because Emily Campagno and I were watching in Las Vegas. We were at Freedom Fest. We were getting ready to go to the pool for an hour, even though it was 115 degrees in Vegas. We're like, let's cool off, late afternoon. And then Emily texted me and she was like, Trump has just been shot. I'm coming to your room so we can watch the coverage.
Yeah.
And we watched you and you did such an incredible job.
Thank you.
Is there anything in your training that prepares you for a day like that?
You know, I think just, it's a great question. I think from covering a lot of the things that I have in the past, like I worked in local news in Chicago where I covered all the stuff that happened in 2020, riots and like looting all over Chicago. And then when I've worked and covered things here for Fox News Channel, I think you just kind of get different parts in your toolbox and you never know what your next assignment is. So I think with some of my breaking news coverage that maybe I've done in the past, that maybe helped me become a little bit more calm because there was a second definitely after it happened where, I was nervous and, scared and thinking about my own safety. And then once it got a little bit more under control, I took a deep breath
How
and was
long did
able to
that take?
explain it. I think it happened, in a lot of ways that day, things felt like it happened really quickly and then slow. But I think in order to remember, about why I was there, and it's not about me, it's about the story and the moment and talking to everybody there, so letting them know what happened, took just maybe like 2 deep breaths. I think I just had to remember because, I remember when it happened. So I just did this live report. We had all that extended coverage that day. Shannon was anchoring and doing a great job. And we were talking about how the RNC was happening. And I just tossed to Shannon and said, the former president is coming out now for his rally because he was about an hour late to that rally. So I tossed back. I was still plugged into my IFB so I could listen to the control room and turned around and started taking notes. And he comes out.
So you're watching this speech.
Yeah. And I'm like 80 feet back. So like where you're back, it's like the media risers. So you're on a riser up above the crowd.
So here's the crowd.
Yes. I'm right behind that.
So here's the president, and you're behind the president, facing the crowd.
So I'm facing, so the president's looking, out into the crowd, and then we're right behind that crowd.
So you're looking at the back of his head.
I'm looking at the president's face.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
You were with the crowd. So you
in
have the crowd
right,
POV.
Sorry, right behind the crowd.
Okay.
So we're all like, we were the pool camera that day. So we had our live shot camera, and then Fox also had the pool camera that was the feed of that whole rally for every other network. So we were set up on this stage and had these cameras. It's like any other Trump rally that I had been to on a weekend. I'd been to quite a few recently. So I just started taking notes on my phone because I thought I was going to have to do another live shot right after he stopped talking. And I remember hearing what sounded like, fireworks. And it was like poppers that sounded like someone just threw a bunch of poppers at the ground.
So you think before you hear gunfire that it's going to be dramatic and
That's right.
loud like it
Exactly.
is on Law and Order, when really it sounds tiny.
It sounded tiny. It sounded far away, which now we know it wasn't that far away, coming up on that rooftop. But yeah, it was like a 6 to 8 pops. And then I looked around and there was people on that media riser that took cover. Nobody in the crowd really moved or jumped.
But the media knew that it was gunfire right away.
People were, yeah, they were afraid of that it could be gunfire. I
Okay.
think when you go to these big events, no matter where they are, right? Like you might get, you have that in the back of your head of like, is everything going to be okay? It's one of the most important people, on that stage talking. So you don't know, what's going to happen. You saw the snipers up on the roof. So maybe people were just nervous. I think I didn't know it was gunfire until I heard the snipers firing at the guy on the roof. So I'm looking
So
at
you're hearing
Trump.
gunfire from two directions.
Yeah.
So you're in between the guns that
Yeah.
are, one is trained on the president, the other
That's right.
on the
And I
sniper.
think because, it happened so quickly, like I didn't really fully comprehend what happened until like a little bit later because I'm looking at my phone, then hear the pops and I look up and I see the former president going like this to his ear and then he went down behind the podium. And I'm like, oh my God.
So in that instance, is that when you realized that
I
he
was
was
like,
shot?
I think this in my head, I'm thinking, was he just shot?
Yeah.
And then I heard next to me. So I'm looking at Trump from that meteorizer. And on my right, I heard the sniper shooting up at the roof. And then I saw a little bit of like smoke. And I guess that was from the gun after it was fired. And then the police moved in. And speaking of, like something out of a movie, here come all these federal investigators moving in through the crowd and nobody moved. And they're shouting like, get down, get down. And then we heard them say, shoot her down, shoot her down. And I didn't, in that time frame, the former president was behind that podium. I didn't know where he was shot or what had happened. Nobody did in the crowd. So then you heard him yell out, like, let me grab my shoes, because they had his shoes had come off during this whole thing. Then they picked him up, and I'll never, ever forget, in all my reporting years that I'll continue this, how the former president, was able to put his fist up in the air. After that, he's bleeding from his ear. The crowd is just like in shock, and there's still so much happening. We didn't know what was going to happen after that, and he still said, "Fight, fight, fight." And that's something I think that
Did
will
you
be
hear him say
seared.
that?
Yeah, I mean, we were really pretty close, and that's the thing when you have this media access to things. You're pretty close up to things, and that's kind of where we're always set up is about 80 feet back, like an 80 feet throw. You do your live shots and have that in the background. But yeah, it was a crazy day, and I don't think I understood at the moment, just exactly what was happening, how crazy of a day it was going to end up being with all that live coverage. But the best thing, I could do in that moment was take a deep breath and remember it wasn't about me. It was about explaining to the American people who are watching at home, including you're watching, in Las Vegas, what was happening because people were so scared and they wanted to know answers. And
Yeah, because all we hear
yeah,
is Trump was shot.
exactly.
You don't know what that means.
Nope. Mm-mm. And when we saw him come back up and he was able to use his fist and then, they were getting him into his motorcade, you could tell he was like trying to get back out. Like he wanted to talk to the crowd because
Yeah.
all those people there, they loved the former president. I mean, those people waited for hours, like 6, 7 a.m. They're there. He doesn't talk until 6 p.m. It was like 110 degrees that day with humidity and the heat index. So they were there to see him. They wanted to hear him speak and they didn't want to leave him. They felt like if they all ran out, people were telling me after the shooting, it was like abandoning him. And they wanted
And
to make
he
sure he
didn't
was
want
okay.
to abandon them. And
Yeah.
that's what struck me about that moment because they were replaying it over and over again pretty quickly was his need to comfort and calm people. His need to let them
That's
know
true.
that he was okay, not thinking about himself because, I would go into shock. I think if I were shot, it's like I'd been punched in the face and one time I was punched in the face while I was boxing and I just burst into tears because it's so shocking.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what I would do if I were shot. Like, I think that I would curl up into a ball and freak
Yeah.
out. And the fact that he stood up because he had to communicate to people that he was okay and that the whole movement was going to keep going, no matter how you feel about him or his politics. That was an extraordinary moment that very, very few people on earth would have the wherewithal in that moment to reassure an entire crowd while at the same time potentially putting their lives at continued risk.
Yeah, I don't think anyone knows how they're going to react under pressure, let alone at an attempted assassination. Here he is, he falls down, he gets shot in the ear. He was millimeters away from losing his life. And like you said, it was amazing, whether people agree with his politics or whatever, that he had the courage to stand back up. I mean, and make it about the people that were there and his supporters. I've never really seen anything like that before.
Did you tell the control room that he was shot, or did they tell you? How did
So
that communication?
the communication, so, especially when things like this are happening, and it was one of the biggest stories I'll ever cover in my career, we just really wanted to make sure that what we were putting out there in real time was the clearest and most concise information we had. So I was getting information from witnesses on the ground, and then I was plugged into the control room and then talking with them about what was coming out in different local reports, and then what the police were putting out.
Okay.
So people back here were able to make some calls because I had no cell phone service. So the fact that I was even plugged in still and had connection to the station was a game changer, because if I would have hung up on that IFB, I wouldn't have been able to talk to anyone. And then you're really kind of on your own. So the best thing I knew to do and that I could do was just grab witnesses that were there and talk to them. And then each person we talked to, whether they were close to the stage or people that also had vital information, were right behind that fencing where the shooter ended up being. So everybody I talked to had a little piece of the puzzle, and we were able to kind of put it all together, but wanted to really make sure that what I was reporting was factual, because it was a huge situation. And the last thing I wanted to do was come out and say something that happened that didn't. So I
Yeah.
tried to be very careful.
Don't go anywhere. More Kennedy Saves the World right after this.
And how soon did you know, like, it wasn't a terror plot, or there weren't several people involved, which would have made it a much more fluid situation?
I mean, really, like, it's, still how many unanswered questions, right? And it's been weeks. So in those minutes and moments and hours afterward, we were just dependent on local law enforcement to give us some updates about saying it was one shooter. And then witnesses there told me that. So I was really piecing it all together. And then to find out that, I didn't know once the president was able to, they were able to take him away and he didn't have too serious of an injury somehow.
God.
Thank God. And the fact that it was that close to shoot, he could have been killed on live television. But then finding out about, Corey, the man from Pennsylvania that saved his wife and kids at that rally and shielded them with his body. Those stories started coming out.
I mean,
from
that's
people.
that's another, like, overwhelming
Yeah.
instinct to protect someone else and be so selfless in that
Yeah.
moment. And that's why his story is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And tragic at the same time. And for people like Keith Olbermann, who came out and said, it was shrapnel from a teleprompter, it was glass that hit his ear. Obviously, it was a shooting because 3 people were injured, 2 critically, 1 fatally.
That's right.
And it's, the rush to judgment to make it political, I thought was pretty disgusting. Were you surprised by that?
I mean, I think in the moment I didn't know like what everybody was it was saying. There were people like at the press conference I went to with the Pennsylvania State Police that night. It was like midnight or something. Right before that, they held a press conference on that Saturday, and people were asking the police, was it shrapnel? Was it something from the glass? And they were like, no, it was definitely gunshot. But I think, I think it just kind of depends, how stories end up getting covered. The only thing I can do when I'm on the ground covering it is just to get the facts in real time and bring them back. And, people can decide for themselves what it's all about and what happened. But I don't think for us as reporters in the field, it's ever like up to us to try to slant it or anything. We're just supposed to give people the information and the facts. And that's what I've always done. But horrible day, to be there, and thank God he's okay. I haven't been able to interview the former president since that happened, but talked to his team, and I'm sure, whether he's gone to rallies and RNC after that or not, it's not like it's not going to affect you.
So you do talk to a lot of people within the campaign. How much did the shooting impact his choice for JD Vance?
Well, it's a great question. I think it might have impacted it a great deal. I think when you find out, right, that could have been your last moment on that stage. And he had just talked to our Harris Faulkner, that day at Mar-a-Lago. He did a sit-down interview, and he mentioned to her, it's very important who your VP pick is going to be, because something bad could happen, and that's the person that's going to take over. Then cut to, this shooting happens.
A few hours later.
Yeah, so I think when you think about, what you stand for politically, personally, you really want somebody in your corner and on your team that's going to be able to have those same values. And I think his personal connection, like talking to a lot of the people, he had a lot of people he liked that he could have picked for VP that, were maybe more popular than JD Vance. To some, but everyone told me they just clicked. it's like, they had a good connection. They're on the same page. And I think that's a big deal, right? When you're working with somebody in close quarters, you got to hit the road from all the time. You better make sure you really like them and connect with them. So I think probably after that happened and he was nearly assassinated, he probably thought, I'm going to pick who I like.
Did you know pretty quickly where he went in terms of medical care? Like, was he treated in
Yeah,
Pennsylvania?
so he went to the local hospital. We were only able to get, like, that's the thing, like, especially when you're dealing with like federal authorities, like you can only get so much. Like they're not gonna give you much. Like sometimes, when I'm on these stories in certain areas, you can find maybe somebody in local law enforcement that'll give you something a little bit more. It's different when you're dealing with like the feds. So we were only able to get what they put out, but they did put out that information pretty quickly, and Trump's team put it out. They wanted people to know, not just the media to then put it out, but the people at that rally that also could have been killed too that day. They wanted them to know that the president was okay and he was in good care. So thank God that it was just his earlobe. I don't know how.
Yeah. No, and watching that video and when you watch some of the illustrations of what could have happened and how close the bullet really was and the path that it took, it is absolutely mind-blowing. And it's a scary time because, a lot of people were talking about a place that you lived for a long time, Chicago, and the correlations between what's going on now and what happened in 1968. There was a lot of unrest. We were in the middle of the Vietnam War. Lyndon Johnson was still trying to get the Civil Rights Act passed, and there had been assassinations, Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy Sr., and there was so much uncertainty that it sort of came to a climax in Chicago where protesters were beaten by police, and there was so much unrest, and it feels like we're in that kind of a chaotic zone. Are you covering the DNC in Chicago, and are you worried at all, or did what happened with former President Trump inform how you're going to report from there?
I think after what happened there, it shows you, no matter what assignment you're going to or whatever is happening, with what's happening in politics, you don't know what could happen, what could unfold. And then knowing what plays out in Chicago and that there are a lot of protesters and crowds that are supposed to come there for the DNC. I worked in Chicago for like 4 years, and I'm from the suburbs of Chicago. And so I have a lot of local law enforcement contacts, and I was talking to some guys from the Chicago Police Department about that in the past few months. And they've definitely, they've had a plan in place. Like they're putting a lot of manpower into this.
More since the assassination
I think so. Yeah, definitely. And they, I guess as prepared as they can be. Chicago, unfortunately, has to deal with a lot of stuff. So those cops are used to it. They're used to putting in those extra hours and having a high security plan in place. I think that they're hoping everything goes smoothly. But I think when you show up to a Butler, Pennsylvania rally, it's at a farm fairgrounds. It's like seemed like it was pretty in an area that they should have been able to kind of keep tabs on who was coming and going. You wouldn't think they'd have that happen there. It shows you that, especially in a big city like that they will have more security in place.
Were you surprised that Taylor Swift canceled some concerts after the terror threats to her shows?
I think it seems like from what you hear, it's like every time you turn on the news, and we know it more than maybe the average person because we're in it every day, but there's so many things that are happening that put people on edge. I mean, months ago, you think about what the FBI director said, Christopher Wray, saying we were at, any day, the next 9/11 could happen at any moment. I think, how do you not be so worried about that, especially if you're going to a large event like this, whether it's political or something for fun. And so I think it just shows how things have changed a little bit. And people need to, I guess, be vigilant,
Yes.
keep an eye out for things. But it's scary. People are all excited to go to those concerts for Taylor Swift, and it's a huge deal. People spend all that money and want to get out there and see her. So the fact that, it had to be canceled, I think shows that anything can happen.
Yeah, it's really scary. And it's like, okay, we are in our political discourse has boiled over into just outright aggression and assassination attempt with Donald Trump. But it's like, really? The musical realm? Like the most beloved billionairess who has saved economies in the individual cities where she has toured, and she's in this storybook romance and, traveling the globe. She's never done an international tour, and she's being targeted. It's pretty crazy times. What are you hearing from the Secret Service in terms of morale, communication breakdown and things like that. Like,
Yeah.
is it hard for them right now?
I think so. I mean, I think in law enforcement in general, I remember, standing that night at the press conference, and here these guys are from, it was from the state and in the local government, but like they're there answering for, there was nobody there from some of the higher, like nobody was there from the Secret Service that night on Saturday to answer questions from local and national reporters. People saying, who's this kid that was up on the roof? How'd this happen? So I think from all the law enforcement agencies that were involved, I think maybe there was like people were probably embarrassed. I think they were upset. And I think, you have to look back at exactly, who's in charge at a lot of these places. Most of the people, right? Everyone in law enforcement, most of them get into the job because they want to lay their life on the line to protect people, protect the president, whoever it is. I'm sure that they were so disheartened and upset by everything that played out that day. And then to know there were these communication breakdowns, like these are the highest of the high people. What do you mean you weren't on the right channels?
Yeah.
What do you mean you didn't secure a roof? So I think
It's too hot up there.
I know.
And sloped. We can't have people up there.
I'm sure when the former now, director of the Secret Service said some of those things, I'm sure people at home that are high up in law enforcement, whether it's state, local or not, or national, were probably like, what is going on?
Yeah.
So I think, you just have to reflect on that, and hopefully nothing like this would ever happen again, whether it's at any large event. I think it's really scary. You got to think about that going in.
I agree completely. We need to have a big reset and not forget what's happened.
Yeah.
It's so easy with the news cycle that is so quick and chaotic to forget these things. And we have to remember that life is sacred, even when you disagree with someone.
That's right.
Like, never wish ill on another person, and always travel and party with your friends.
That's most important, especially after covering that. Turks and Caicos
Yes,
was the
it was
best,
so
best timing.
necessary.
That's right.
Cheers to you and your reporting, Alexis
Thank
McAdams. You're amazing.
Thank you for having me. You're amazing.
This has been Kennedy Saves the World. Wait, hold on. Yeah, Amalfi Spritz. Along with Alexis McAdams, I'm Kennedy.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.
Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.